All right, everybody, again, this is Social Venture Partners Understanding what happens after you submit your grant proposal workshop, which is part of our Ask the Expert series here at Social Venture Partners San Antonio. Well, welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started and begin to really think through what our strategy is going to be like for 2022. If you haven't met, as I said earlier, Arlene Siller or worked with her before, you are in for a wonderful treat and very excited to have Arlene with us today. If you don't know much about her, Arlene has been doing this for a few years since she was in kindergarten. She has 25 years of experience. She's written millions, tens of millions of dollars in grants across all states and has fantastic experience. What many people don't know is Arlene also has lots of experience also in the medical field and is just wicked smart on many different things, but this is where her heart is. And that's why we're so fortunate to have her as a partner with SVP and why we're so lucky to have her for a little bit of time today. Her business is Ascend Nonprofit and Business Solutions. You can find them on the website. Sorry, you can hear my dogs jingling in the background. That's part of our wonderful Zoom experience. But I'm going to go ahead and make sure that you get as much time to ask her questions and as much time for her presentation as possible. Another person that's helping us with this is another social venture partner, Nisi Bennett. You'll see her on the list. You'll see her on the attendee list. Nisi is our fantastic social media director and also leads our committee for DEI. So wonderful to have you two and the other partners that are with us. So Arlene, I'm going to turn it over to you to go ahead and get started and welcome everyone. And thank you guys for making it on a warm December afternoon.
I know, it's crazy, isn't it? Thank you, Becky, for the introduction. So we're going to be talking about understanding what happens after you submit your grant proposal. And as Becky mentioned, I am one of the members of Social Venture Partners. I absolutely love working with nonprofits and being part of the community and just helping you guys in any way that I possibly can. Just some general housekeeping tips. If you have questions, please post them in the chat. Even if it's in the middle of the presentation, I will take a look at those. If they're timely and relevant, I'll answer them then. If not, I'll save them for the end, but I do want you to ask me anything, even if it really does not have to do with this material. It's your time to have me. And so take advantage of it and just put whatever questions you need to in there. If I can answer them, I will. I don't assume to know everything. And if I don't know it, I will look into it and get back with you. So let's get started. Click in here. All right, there we go. This is just a general graphic. Don't worry about the details. It's really, really small, but this is kind of the plan that happens as you are writing a grant proposal. You sort of start here, you go through these multitude of steps of knowing yourself, building true partnerships, understanding what the plan is, creating a winning proposal. And this little box right here, don't worry about the details of it, is where you actually submit. The next box is where you're actually awarded. And there is a lot that happens in that little arrow that goes from the submit to getting funded and thanking the funder for that opportunity to receive those funds and do the work that you do. So we're actually going to just be covering what happens in that little arrow, and you're going to see that it is a lot of things. Just to kind of let you know some statistics about this, only 2% of grant writers have ever been a reviewer and therefore fully understand the process. And so hopefully by the end of this webinar with me, you will be part of that 2% and be able to apply it to your grant strategy that you have for your organization. So who am I and why should you even care and listen to me? Well, again, my name is Arlene Siller. I am the founder and CEO of Ascend Nonprofit and Business Solutions. We are a general grant writing firm. And one of the other things that I started was Grant Yourself Success. That's where we teach grant writing. But what's important for you today and why we are here is that I have been a government and a foundation grant reviewer. So in terms of government, I've been part of a team that's responsible for federal dollars in health and human services and biomedical research. And then as far as foundations are concerned, I've worked with community foundations and family foundations. And so that's the part that I'm bringing you here today, is that experience that I've had. And one of the reasons I engaged in that was so that as a grant writer, and I could really understand that process and apply it to the grant writing on the front end. So that when it reached the reviewers, I understood that process. And that's exactly what I want you to get from this today. So why do funders even do an evaluation? So no matter how different funders can be, they all share this need to know what works, and especially what works well. The better that funders can demonstrate how their grants are making a difference, the more value they bring to their communities. To know what works, funders have to evaluate their grants. Evaluation helps the funder assess the quality or the impact of funded programs, to plan and implement new projects and programs, and to make future grant decisions and demonstrate the accountability to the public trust. So that's why they do it. It's not to frustrate you, although it does feel like that as a grant writer, but this is really why they do that. And so overall, the application evaluation looks something like this. It's, they're looking at the extent to which the submitted grant aligns with the focus areas of their organization. They're looking for clear and measurable program objectives and outcomes. Financial responsibility is a really huge one. The amount and ability to support from other funding sources, and then how complete the grant application was in that submission packet, and then what is the available level of funding that they have. So proposal timelines, really, if you've met one funder, you've met one funder, not only in the grant application process, but on their review process. Most of them, it can be anywhere from 1 to 6 months. It really depends on the volume of the requests and what their actual process is. I have seen some take as long as 18 months. And those were really, really involved funders in the process. But generally, it's about 2 months. So depending upon the complexity of the grant, the extent of revisions if necessary, and the timeliness of your response as a grantee. So this is something that's really important to factor into your funding. What I want you to take away from this, one of the big ones, grants are not quick money. And so when you're coming up with that strategy, it's really important to have an annual strategy where you're writing multiple grants throughout the year in anticipation of funding that's going to come in different quarters, different months, according to what your needs are. And especially if you have seasonal programs, you really want to take this into account. Grants are an investment of your time and your resources as an organization. So the other thing too is, even though I am a grant writer and love all things grants, I will not ever tell anybody that you should only be writing grants as part of your fundraising strategy. Grants are only one component of it. You need to diversify that revenue. So some funders, especially those that are by invitation only, you'll see that sometimes on some of their websites, this part of the process can be a little bit more lengthy. And that's why I said that 1 to 6 months, because they'll really work with you to do revisions, elaborate, clarify different parts of your proposal. They really help you to shape what you're doing that also fits their portfolio. So there's a lot of variation in terms of the timeline. Who are the people that review it? Well, it's different for every organization, and you're going to keep hearing me keep hearing me say this thing about differences. So from a corporate standpoint, it's usually their community relations personnel and some senior management that are part of that team. They and foundation and government will also form a committee usually, and that can be of your peers. It can be community members, family, if it's a family trust. Employees, institutions of higher education, especially if it's in those education components, individuals with some specific knowledge about the area that the grant is tied to, business community, nonprofits, and then the board or advisory council. And I will say that most funders work really hard to make good decisions about where the dollars are going to go, that they're entrusted, that are entrusted to their stewardship. That's not always the case, but I will say that the majority of them really do that. So you hit submit, what happens? Well, nothing on your end, except maybe a celebration, because I know I go through this when I submit, and hopefully you do too. But from this standpoint, on the reviewer side, the work is just getting started in the decision-making process. But while you were writing your grant, there was a lot of work that actually went into putting the RFP together, the guidelines, scheduling, choosing reviewers, determining funding amounts. But when we hit submit, that is where the decision-making starts for a reviewer. Your proposal is going to go through a series of checkpoints in a process. This process that I'm going to show you today is a typical process. Again, everyone is different. So because of that, the processes are going to vary. So I'm showing you the basics of an evaluation process, mainly on the government side, because it is a little bit more involved than most foundations and corporations. But many of them follow this just to one extent or another. Some have a very, very formal review process that is fully documented along the entire way. Others have a less formal process. Some reviewers are well qualified to review your proposals. Others pick people who may not, really have a good appreciation for your sector and the work that you do. So it's just going to vary from funder to funder. This is just an example from an RFP. That's a request for a proposal from a government that just shows the beginning of the section in terms of how they conduct the review and selection process. Government grants are usually going to have a little more transparency in this, and they will state this. Some foundations and corporations are good at this, but others not so much. So it really is this black box of what happens in this process. But for government, they usually outline it. This is just the first. As you can tell, this RFP is about 48 pages, and the selection process is about 3 pages in terms of a description. So it's something you want to read if you do have that available to you. So what I like to show this graphic of kind of what goes through that process. And Becky mentioned to you guys that I have a background in biomedical sciences. So this is actually some particles that are going through a filtration, but I love it. So I get to combine my two loves of science and grant writing. And so what I want you to see here is this process of submitting a proposal and getting to award. So if on the back end, a funder is only going to fund 3 proposals, you can see that on this end, that's where all of us are submitting, right? So the amounts will vary according to how many people are applying. So the first checkpoint is this deadline, and that's why I have this listed here. So if you didn't make the deadline, let's say that the funder says October 31st at 11:59 p.m., your proposal is eliminated. It doesn't matter what excuses you're going to give them. It doesn't matter if you had a really bad storm and it went out, your electricity went out, your internet went out, those types of things don't matter. Very few times, if there is a major natural disaster in a particular area, then you will see them have some flexibility. But for the most part, if someone on your staff got sick, I've had that happen as well. It doesn't matter. The deadline is the deadline. So that's the first checkpoint in which they eliminate. So all that hard work would have been for nothing. And this is why it's really, really important for you to start early and have a schedule that you back into. So that's my tip for you. I'm going to give you little tips that I have implemented over the 27 years that I've been grant writing is never submit the day of the grant. Okay, that's the first one I'm going to give you, and it's really, really big. So if the RFP states that 3 proposals will be funded and there is $750,000 available for funding, it doesn't mean they're all going to be distributed equally, but you can see on the left side, if we have over 50 proposals going in, we have to have a process. There has to be a process in place to get to just those 3 that we're going to award. So again, these numbers here are just for illustration purposes. I've been on some reviews where we've received over 278 proposals. Okay, so they have to go through some process in order for us to award. So when a funder states in a denied letter, we had many qualified proposals, but we were unable to fund yours. This is what they mean right here. Okay. So again, that first checkpoint is the deadline. Meet the deadline. Don't wait until the day of to submit. The next part is that your proposal is going to go through a technical review. Okay, so the question that's being asked at this point is, does the proposal as submitted follow the rules set forth in the RFP? Okay, so this is objective scrutiny, not qualitative. Some funders have hard requirements, some are flexible. Why is that? Well, especially with government dollars, there are legal requirements and laws on the review side. So this is one of the reasons that they have to have this in place. Also, for some funders, you know, in the funding area, they believe that this levels the playing field. I know that there's a lot of variables that go into that. I won't get into that with you, but I'm on your side. But some believe that, you know, having this technical review process levels the playing field. It's also a measure of grantee reliability, right? So this is going to show the funder that you're easy to work with, that you pay attention, you follow the rules, right? And everybody wants to work with someone easy. This helps them determine that. It's also an easy way out for elimination. So again, we've got all those proposals going into the funnel. We can only have a few coming out. We've got to eliminate. And this is one of the ways in which they do that. So what are some examples of this? You'll see that they will ask for a specific font type, specific font size, margins, page limits, double spacing, section headers, number of attachments, the name of the attachment, whether you have an audit or no audit, what's your rating on GuideStar? Did you leave a question blank? Are you over the character limits, or did you not attach a specific document? So I'm going to give you another tip here. Set up your document with whatever parameters the funder asks at the beginning, and anybody who touches that document, make sure they understand, and then just do one double check again before you hit submit to make sure that you've got the right font, size, margins, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so that's my second tip for you. So in this technical review, which is our next checkpoint, this is usually done by a staff member. It's usually not the review team. So they'll assign someone within the organization that goes through those things and eliminates those proposals that did not follow the directions. So only those that make it through the technical review will go to that next round. And this next round, this space right here, there is so much going on here. There are so many steps, and that's what takes up the majority of the decision time. So this is where reviewers come into play. So as a reviewer, now I'm really involved. So we're going to go through this, the steps of what goes on in this space. And I'm going to tell you that as a writer, you're going to be frustrated, because I am. But I want you to understand that, and they say knowledge is power. So now you'll get some understanding of what's really happening there. So the first part is the individual review, and I'm showing you what it used to look like when we reviewed, and we get these big binders, and Nisi and I were talking about this last night. Now it comes electronically, but it's still the same principle. At this point, what has happened is the proposals have been vetted, the materials have been prepared, we've compiled the scoring sheets, the reviewers have had training on reviewing process and scoring, and then this is where the process really differs by funders. So first, you're going to have that individual review. And what's happening here is reviewers are making a subjective, qualitative judgment of your response to the questions asked in the application. So it's an evaluative judgment about how the information you provided responds to the question that the funder asked. This is not an objective process, and it can't be. Objective is like math, 2 + 2 = 4. There is no argument to that, but in this process, we all see it differently. So this is an example, again, from a government RFP, although other funders, corporations, foundations have something similar, not exact, but it's the rubric or the scoring system. And this is usually found in the back of an RFP, or it will be in the guidelines section of your funder's website. And that's why it's so important, another tip, to make sure that you read all of the website of your funder in terms of the guidelines and the application and any general information about the funder and their areas of interest. You want to make sure that you really understand this. So some things I want you to notice here is they're telling you very specifically of what the reviewers are going to be looking for in this section and the point spread for each one. So you see the maximum points that you can earn in a section. This also helps you determine in terms of your time where you want to put a lot of effort because you want the highest points, okay? So as reviewers, this is what we get along with your proposal and a scoring sheet. We don't get the full RFP. So you want to make sure, this is my next tip for you, you write to this section, okay? So sometimes, and you will find this a lot in government grants, it does happen in other ones, but specifically in government grants, the rubric section will have things in it. And then when you're looking at the RFP and following the guides, you'll see maybe a direction that deviates a little bit from the scoring, or it's additional information that they're looking for. The first thing you want to do is write to this section, then go back to those other sections, and anything that wasn't in here, then you can fill in, okay? So that's just my next tip for you. Always write to this section because as reviewers, this is all we have to score you on, okay? So make sure that you have that as part of your process. All right, now comes the real insight into kind of what happens behind the scenes. So what you see here is the scoring method that we use. So we're reviewing proposal number 2. We're never given the name of your organization. All that stuff is blocked out for us. It's only, the proposal that is in front of us, not all of them at the same time. Every funder has a different way of doing it. But A through G here are the individual reviewers. So our names are taken out as well. Items 1 through 12 that you see over here are the questions. So we're supposed to read the section and then the item, the question, and then we're supposed to assign a value to it. So what you'll see here, this is the possible number of points that you could have received overall, and then for each question. And then you'll see the scoring that each reviewer provided, and then there's a high, there's a low, and there's an average. So this is the scoring system based on that rubric that we just saw. The other thing that we're asked to do is we're asked to provide comments. So in this section, we are evaluating one of the questions which had to do with systemic impact. And so the question is asking us, do you feel that the work and or the impact of this project will have the support it needs to continue beyond the funding period? That's the question that we're asked. So here are the reviewers again, A through G, the points that they assigned, and then their comments. This is where the subjectivity comes in, and this is where it's going to frustrate you. So if you will notice, draw your attention to B and G. You can read the scores from each reviewer, but also the comments. So in B here, B reviewer states that they see, they're pleased to see that the number of teachers that are able to participate and the collaboration amongst several West Valley districts. G, however, says that they're concerned about the depth of training over a large number of teachers, and they wish the collaboration was stronger. So this is a great example to show you of what is happening behind the scenes, because these reviewers are looking at the exact same question, the exact same response, the exact same scoring criteria, and they have very different views on the information that has been presented, not only in the points, but in their response. This happens all the time, okay? There's not a lot we can do there. So again, I'm just reminding you, we're still in this section. We haven't left it, okay? So now what needs to happen is the program officer will compile all those scores from all the reviewers, all the comments, and turn that into some sort of decision-focused information. And I'm going to show you an example of that in just a second. But this is a procedural round, and it's really important in the process of reviewers deciding award or deny. And if this process right here is thoughtfully and thoroughly done, it brings key elements of individual proposals into focus. It surfaces distinction, trends, and patterns amongst individual reviewer results. I have been on some review panels where when we combined all the reviewers' comments, there was always one reviewer that really scored low, and that had to be evaluated because it was consistent with everyone. And in that process, there were discussions on whether they should eliminate that reviewer. It doesn't happen very often, but this is where you want to pick some of those distinctions and patterns just in case they really are influencing the results in a way that's not good for everyone involved. But this also is the first time that we get to put head-to-head comparison of proposal qualities, and it highlights other non-competitive factors that are essential to the decision-making process, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute too. So at this point, the program officers try to make it as easy as possible for the review team to be as confident as possible that they are making the best decision possible, given the proposals they have to work with and the money that is available. So really tough decisions are coming into play. So what does that informed decision-making data look like? Well, it looks something like this. Don't worry about the specifics of it. So what we have is the reviewers A through G. Now we have all the proposals next to each other. We have the scores, the high scores they've been given, the low scores, the average. We also have the amount being requested by every organization, the areas of focus, the geographic area, and then we also have other metrics that we can use to draw some information. So now this is where a group comes together and starts to have discussions about your organization and your proposal. And there's also negotiations that take place amongst reviewers. Some of us get really passionate about one organization or another. And this is that opportunity to go back and forth and fight for you. And so that's what's really important in this process as well, is know that there are people fighting for you on the other end. So again, this is our checkpoint. We're still operating in the same space. We haven't left this space yet. So one of the things that I want you to consider here is that funders are looking to create the portfolio funded projects that collectively best furthers their specific intentions to that funding round. So half of the success of any grant proposal in any grant making round is something you have absolutely no control over. You know what that is? That's who else submits a proposal. And this is going to totally frustrate you, and let me tell you why. And this is one of the reasons that we'll find out from other organizations, are y'all submitting? Because then you know who's going in as well. Okay, so let me give you this example. Let's say that we have narrowed all those applications, gone through that process. We get down to the top 7 and we have to choose. We can only choose 4, as was stated in the RFP and according to a budget. And we have kind of listed that a score of over 85 are the contenders that will receive a final award. So we've got, 98 all the way down to 82. We have organizations that represent different parts of the country. They're doing a community approach to improved vaccine uptake, and these are the target populations that they serve. So if we say it's just 85 or greater and you get the funding, here's the line, okay? So then you would expect this, right? That's what you think, okay, would be fair. The top 4 are the ones that we're going to get. That's it. And this makes sense and it seems fair. However, it's not what actually happens. This is what actually happens. And you'll see these ones that are in yellow. Those are the ones that are actually the ones who've been awarded. And you're thinking, why did this happen? So in addition to matching the mission and scoring of proposals, 2 other non-competitive criteria apply to final funding decisions. Their diversity in representation of region, be it zip codes, beside a town, parts of the state or country, as well as diversity in high needs populations to be served by the awarded projects. So in the first 2, we see that they're roughly from the same geographic area. That's Minnesota. So what we have to do with those 2 then is we look at the target population. And we see that in Fargo-Moorhead, is the only one, when we look at everyone, serving refugees. That's a target population for us. They're the only ones doing it. These two are in the same geography. So we keep the Fargo-Moorhead refugee serving organization, and Minneapolis is eliminated, even though it had the highest points. Okay. Next, we look at the next two, which are New York and Boston. Ooh, okay. Sorry about that. We have a quarry that's by us, and I guess they just blew up something and the whole house just rattled. Either that or it was mind-blowing what I just showed you. It could, you know, whatever, it worked. Okay, so for this, we have New York and Boston. They're roughly the same geography. And so now again, we have to look at target population. So we see that New York is serving Spanish speaking, Boston is serving the working poor. But when we go down to Chicago, we see Chicago is also serving Spanish speaking. Okay, so we have two organizations that are serving Spanish speaking individuals. So based on this, we would eliminate New York and we would keep Boston for the geography and Chicago in terms of who they're serving. Okay, everybody with me? Yes, yes, okay. All right. Ooh, let's see what happened here. Okay, so the next one theoretically should be McAllen, and that should have been our choice. But we haven't funded any projects serving Native Americans in the last 2 years, and that's what you see there. And so that's why instead of it just being the top 4, you see this distribution according to geography, according to people served, and also in terms of those who have not received funding for a while for a specific population. And this is how that the review process happens. So remember again that funders are looking to create a portfolio of funded projects that collectively best furthers their specific intentions that for that funding round. Okay, so we've gotten to this part, another checkpoint. So we've read the proposals, we have some scoring. Now we also need to look at the assessment of the organization. So in this, your financials matter, and they matter a lot. And it's very important that you have board members who can really sift through your financials, who can recognize red flags, who can address them, who can help you to understand this. Really, really important on this. So the funders are going to review your organization's financial health and leadership, specifically evaluating the following things: your financial history, including evidence of ability to achieve and maintain operating surpluses as a measure of sound financial management. They're also going to be looking at the strength of your balance sheet, including adequate current and net assets. They're going to look at your senior management team tenure, as well as your board tenure and professional affiliations and skill sets and diversity to determine the composition, strength, and continuity of leadership. They're also going to be looking at your strategic direction and mission alignment. And this is why for some organizations, maybe in their mission statement, it states that they're dealing with literacy, but all of a sudden they're submitting a proposal to a funder for food insecurity and a food pantry. This is why they don't get funded. It didn't align with their mission either. And that's a red flag for funders. Not to say that they won't allow you to take on new areas, but you have to make a really good case for it. And I would have had a conversation with the funder before I would have submitted that. But this is another area that they're looking at. They want to look at your business plan, your operating budget, and just what your overall strategy is for your organization and who's helping to develop that strategy. So some key success criteria is, like an investor, funders are ultimately seeking to understand the potential benefits of a project. Will it work? What will it achieve? What is the return on the investment? How does it help the community or the individuals being served? So in evaluating a project's potential for success, funders seek evidence of the following: your commitment from your board, realistic project budgets, a thorough implementation plan, a plan to measure your performance that's really solid, post-implementation operating procedures. If you have to set up another account because it's a government grant, you need to separate those dollars. Are you doing that? Do you have additional funding sources to support this project? Are they in play? It's okay if they're pending. You want to put that information in. And then what is the sustainability of the project? Key staff may also request some additional information or have a site visit as part of this process. And that's just to better familiarize themselves with your organization, your management team, and where the project is going to be happening. The staff will initiate this request for meetings or for visits. Please don't reach out to funders and ask them if you can answer questions, or if they want to come out. Don't do stuff like that. If they need to do that as part of the process, they would have put that in the RFP or the guidelines, or they will reach out to you if they choose to do that. And then another part is the group that met in terms of the review will also make some decisions. Not some decisions, they will make decisions about the funding. So even though there was $750,000 available, it might not be distributed equally to all three awardees. Some may get more than others. It will just depend. So all of you who have written grants, you know that sometimes you will put in for a $50,000 application and they choose to give you 25. That's what's happening in this part of the process. Understand that it's just not arbitrary. There's a reason behind what they did what they did. And then the next part is that you will have been given an award letter that's either going to come by email or snail mail, and there will be some negotiations and then a signed contract. I'm going to tell you all this right here too. Next tip, make sure you read the contract. Sometimes they make mistakes on the other end. And especially if the dollar amount that you put in is different from what you were awarded, because then you can also change your metrics in terms of numbers served. So if you were going to serve 150 people with 500,000 and they only gave you 350,000, you want to make sure that you now have decreased the numbers unless you're leveraging those dollars. But again, you want to make sure that you thoroughly read this contract. Don't just sign it because you're excited that you got money. You can really get yourself into some trouble here. So we've walked through this whole process of submission all the way to award. And now hopefully you have a better understanding of what happens in this space, but specifically in these two bars here, because there is a lot that goes on. So there are three primary reasons that donors deny funding, and that's their capacity to give. So grantors have a finite number of dollars to award in each cycle, and requests often exceed the grantor's budget. That's just the nature of the game. The other thing is giving priorities. So although your organization or proposal might have technically been eligible for funding from a specific grantor, the proposal itself may not have aligned with their giving priorities as closely as they would like it to. So grantors are investors and will most likely award a proposal that addresses key priority areas over those that just kind of touch it or are on the outskirts. So you want to be careful with that. And then the next thing is the quality of the proposal. And that's grantors seek assurances that grantees are committed and that they're equipped to administer the funds in a way that achieves the intended impact. So some faux pas that happen here that result in denied letters are failure to follow the guidelines. So they told you what to do and you didn't follow it. So that's a good reason to kick it out. You have a weak program design. The proposal was vague, it was overambitious, or it failed to articulate strategies for achieving the stated goals and objectives. You put too much in. You didn't have good evaluation measures in place, and there was no sustainability plan. So every question is important. Don't leave it blank and don't skim over it because you don't like it or you don't want to answer it. And I hear a lot of clients sometimes say, well, why are they asking that? It doesn't matter. They asked it. If you wanted funding, answer the question. Another thing is a weak organization. And what I mean by that is that you're in poor financial health, or you're lacking leadership, or there's lack of diversity, or there's lack of people in place to be able to execute the project. So those are some things that you want to look for. And then the last one is it's poorly written. You know, it wasn't clear, it wasn't concise, and it wasn't compelling. Okay. So those are some of the reasons why they may deny you. So some takeaways from this, grant making is less competitive more than it is subjective. You know, it is competitive at the onset, but really it's subjective in the middle of that review. Points aren't all that matters. And we saw that in that exercise that I walked you through. And the entire organization is responsible for the success of a grant, not just the grant writer. Okay. My grant writers love when I state this part, especially when their bosses are on here. So for all you bosses, this is in reference to your grant writers. The grant writer's job is not to secure award. It is to write the best grant in support of award. That's very, very different. And they're responsible to get you to the technical review. So in that process that we just went through, this is where the grant writer stops, really. They've done all the work to get the grant written all the way through to submission and to get it to the technical requirements. The rest of this, everything that happens after that, is up to the strength of your organization and then the reviewer's discretion. Okay, so please keep that in mind, because I think we put too much emphasis on the grant writer to get these grants in, and when they don't, we're questioning their skill sets. It's not always what we write, it's what we have available to write about your organization. So please, please, please consider that. So with that, if you have found this information valuable, please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Our handle is @AscendNBS. We post a lot of grant writing tips. It's also a place you can ask me questions, so you can post those things in there. Our website also contains blogs on all things grant writing. We only do grant writing. I don't do anything on individual giving or events or anything like that, so you're not going to get that from me. So if you want to follow us, do that. And then now I will open it up to questions. Okay, so I have one from Emma. She says, I'm finding it hard to find seed money to start my private Christian school early learning center through 4th grade. Any suggestions? Seed funding is really hard because they have nothing to go on for your financials. So you might have to do some loans there. You might have to do some other types of fundraising. Any dollars that you get in, they just want to see that you can manage those dollars. So I'm going to be blunt, it sucks for us when we're first starting out, because you need the money, but it's hard to get it. But you have to understand it from a funder's perspective, right? It's an investment, and it's just like we would in terms of the stock market. We're going to look for those that are the strongest organizations. So you just have to keep chugging along, Emma, finding any opportunities that you can. There are some for seed funding. The other, we're seeing a lot that are coming out for grassroots organizations. Sometimes you might qualify for that, for women-led and minority-led, and that's where there's more funding dollars available for seed funding. So you want to look at those types of schools. And one funder that I can think of, they're called New Schools. They do a lot of grassroots education type funding initiatives. I'm not sure on the Christian school part. I don't know that. I'm not telling you not to. I've just not written to them for a Christian school. Okay, so Emma also asked, we are looking on the south side of town out by Toyota, where there is not much competition and the need is real. Thank you for this information. Yeah. Jasmine said, great news. So we get a grant awarded 9 months after we apply for it. It is time to apply for next year. Is it too early to apply after you were just awarded a grant? I would have the conversation with the funder to ask them. So some will allow it, some will not. Some you have to have completed a report or provided them with something before you can apply. So always check with the funder. Rachel says, is it beneficial to keep going back to the same foundation if your organization has received award funding in the past, or is it best to take a break? Essentially, how many times? How many times should you keep going to the same funding well? Rachel, there is no hard and fast rule. Some funders really prefer to work with the same organizations over and over because they know what they get, okay? And it makes their job easier. And as long as you still fall within their priority area, they're going to still choose to fund you, okay? So those are questions you really want to have with the funder. You will start to notice when funding starts to decrease, maybe it was ramping up and then all of a sudden they start to bring it down. There's probably some changes that are going on within that foundation or that funder. And you want to have those conversations. But I will say you should always be looking for new funding. If not, you're leaving money on the table. Grant research is extremely time consuming, people. It really, really is. So when you're asking your staff to do it, please understand that it takes a while to find the best fit funder for you, okay? And in that process, you definitely should be looking because there's a lot of new great opportunities out there, which is new money for you. But you have to invest in grant research. And so this just needs to be part of your strategy for your fundraising grant department. You can choose to do it 1 or 2 times a year. You can choose to do it for a particular quarter. But at least, do it minimum of once a year. Now, the thing with grant research as well is remember grants are cyclical. And so the databases that you might use for research will only have the information that is provided by all the funders out there. And so what's available today in December is not going to be the same as what we're going to see in April of next year or August of next year. So it's cyclical. So just remember that. Any other questions? Well, hopefully you found this helpful and hopefully it gives you some insights. Okay, I did get another one. Do you have any super tips for foundation grants? Foundations are very relational, especially in San Antonio. So if you're in the San Antonio area, I'd say Texas overall, they're very relational. So you really want to establish that relationship with funders. Funders, once they start working with you, they go out of their way to help you, is what I have seen. So let's say in the process, they've been working with you for a while, you submit an application and you forgot one document. Technically, you should be eliminated, but I have seen situations where funders will come back to the organization and say, hey, you left this off, can you submit it to me? Okay. And that's part of that relationship that they have that's ongoing. So relationships are key. If you're shy or you're not really good at networking, this is something that you really should get good at because those relationships are really key to the success of your organization and your funding. Okay, so Jessica says, I have found a few opportunities with funders who do not want to be contacted and ask that we submit a one-page letter, but I have not had any luck getting an award from them. Do you have any suggestions on how to be awarded from these organizations? Yes. Okay, so a lot of funders don't want to be contacted. They don't necessarily tell you that. Some do. Some will say, you can post questions to an email that just kind of goes out into infinity. But some of them don't want to be contacted. It's obvious because they put no contact information and it's totally left up to you. But in those cases where you're doing a one-page letter, you want to find a grant that you've submitted or that you feel was pretty thorough and use that as your guideline for that one pager to make sure that you're hitting all the things that theoretically would be a question on a larger grant. So it could be that they're just not getting the full gist of what you're doing because it's not comprehensive. So in those cases where they just say submit a one-pager, two-pager, they give you no prompts, nothing like that, use a grant that is pretty extensive and then just make that fit to the page limit that the funder stated, but have all of the key areas addressed is what I would suggest. If I'm a new nonprofit, how do I approach another established nonprofit for collaboration? Okay, first of all, you absolutely have to do this in this environment. Funders are not interested in funding siloed organizations, period. It is not enough to just say, we provide, food for people who are experiencing food insecurity. They want to know that you have other partners in place that can address an issue with transportation and homelessness or IDs or anything else that may come up when you're addressing the population. So collaboration is key. You want to look at the people that you're serving. They're going to best tell you what they need. And if it's not something you're doing, first of all, don't chase that. It's not that you're supposed to do everything. It's that you were supposed to partner to help serve that individual. So if you start to notice that there are a lot of healthcare issues coming up with the population that you serve, and they've brought that to your attention, or you've just noticed it in terms of serving them, then you want to look for those organizations that do that and partner with them. If you're dealing with children, and especially right now after COVID and a lot of the deaths that we have, and you see that the children are grieving and it's affecting their academics, and you deal on the academic side, but this other stuff is coming up, then you want to partner with an organization that deals with grief for children or counseling services. So your population tells you those other partners that you should have. And you want to take a step back and you want to look at what would make my organization stronger. What would be a really good thing for me to put in that question where it asks about partners? What relationships should I have in place? We also have Billy on here who has his logo for Sacred. Sacred is another great thing that I use in the grants that I write as well. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Sacred, they provide a resource for all of the different services that are available in Bexar County and surrounding areas. And that is one thing that you can put into that partner section, because even if you're not directly partnering with that organization right now, if I need to find out, if somebody comes to me and they say, I can't get a job because I don't have an ID, I can go on to Sacred and look who is doing ID services and give them a call. That information is on that website of Sacred. So that is a partner. For you guys, reach out to Billy, but get to know Sacred, but you have to make other partnerships as well. Could you elaborate on writing to the rubric? Yeah, so they're going to give you that rubric of, and I'll go back to that slide for just a second. Okay. No. So they're going to give you, this is very detailed because it's a government one. Not all of them are like this, but they'll give you some indication of what the reviewer is supposed to be looking for. So when you're writing your overall objectives, you want to make sure that you're touching on each of the points in here, that you're touching on each of the questions to receive the maximum points. And that's what I mean by writing to it. So if they do give you a rubric, write to that first, then go in and make sure that all the other stuff that they have asked is in there. Then make sure that you're abiding by character limits and page limits and all that other stuff, but make sure everything is addressed. Because if you leave something out, you lose a point. So the goal here is maximum points, and this is how you know that you can achieve that. If they're scoring at a 15, you want to get 13 and above, right? And so the way that you're going to know if you're doing that is, are you addressing the questions that are right here? How do I engage my organization to help provide organization information so I can write a stronger grant? So I think it's, really educating those above you or those that you have to get the information from is, I do have clients sometimes. I'll give you a perfect example. This grant was asking for resumes, and her response is, I provided you bio sketches. And I'm like, that's not what the funder is asking. So you have to show them that. But I think education in this whole process of making sure that not everyone who is in a management executive supervisory position has been a grant writer or a good grant writer. Okay. So they may just choose to write grants the way they choose to write and provide the information. Chances are pretty good they're not getting funded. It really is about educating those above you to understand that these are things that the funder is asking, and that our best chances of getting awarded are if we follow this. And I know that's a hard point. I've had that with some accountants that I've worked with before, where they want to give me the documents they want to give me, and not necessarily what the funder is asking. So if the funder is asking for a balance sheet through January 31st, they are like, well, December is good enough. Okay, well, that's not what the funder asked for. So you just have to keep going back at it. Hopefully, you can talk to other people who will help you within the organization be able to get the information that you need to submit the best grant possible. How important is alignment with the funder's current priorities? It is absolutely essential. If you do not align with the funder's priorities, please don't waste your time writing the grant. You're not going to get funded unless you're just really starting out. You've got free time and you want to kind of test the waters. I don't know who that is, but could be. I don't know. But you don't want to do that. If the funder is only working with children, do not send them something on veterans. Do not send them something on an elderly population. They are not interested. You just wasted your time. You have. That's why we say best fit funders. It's not just any funders. Don't do that. That's a really bad strategy to have in place. You want to find best fit funders, and that's where your research and keywords, key areas, geography, all of that needs to be hammered out with the organization overall. Where can you start looking for grants? Anything, anywhere, honestly, even something as simple as a Google search. But you can use grant databases. So you can go to grants.gov if you're interested in a government grant, but I will also say you have to be ready for a government grant. It's not something that you want to engage in, and it's not something that you should do lightly. It is an organization decision, because there are a lot, you're entering into an agreement with the United States of America. Okay, so I'm just going to say that. So it's like the IRS, but worse. And then from that, you can also, there's, Foundation Center, Foundation Directory, I think is what it's called now, Grant Gopher, Grant Watch. There's many different databases. If you don't have access to one, you can do Foundation Directory through the Area Foundation. And I think they said now until May of next year, if you register with them and you're a member of the Area Foundation, you get free access, and it's for 24 full hours once a month. But also TechSoup offers a lot of opportunities for you to get the grant databases at a reduced cost. So I used Foundation Directory. I think it cost me as a business $1,600 a year. It's pretty pricey. But for you guys as nonprofits, there are, I think, 2 times of the year that you can get it for about $300 or $400. Grant Watch is another one. Sometimes y'all can pick up for $99. And that's for a whole year, not per month. So those are some really good ones for you to look at. And then there are, like Becky is stating, there are a lot of resources on candid.com. And then for your particular area, once you get to know who those funders are, I would sign up for their newsletters. And a lot of time those grants will come to you in that newsletter. So I will stop here because we are out of time. But I just want to thank everyone for their time today, and hopefully you have found this to be really, really helpful. Becky, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Arlene. Wonderful. Now I guess you can understand why we are so honored and proud to have Arlene as a part of Social Venture Partners. She's a wonderful person to have on our team. Please do utilize her and SVP as a resource and as a place where you can ask us questions. That's our mission. as a donor group, and we're here to try to help nonprofits just be a little bit better. I see a lot of familiar faces and some wonderful questions. Thank you, Emma and Jasmine. They're part of our fellowship. It's great to see you guys. And our next one, we do surveys after this, and our next one looks like is going to be on public relations. And I have lined up the most recently retired PR executive vice president for USAA to do that with me. Don't know the date yet. We're working on that, but look for that in early 2022. And so Chris Talley and I are going to do some PR press relations kind of work coming up, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the new year. In the meantime, very happy holidays. Hug your families and your people, and most of all, thank you so much for what you do in San Antonio and for our community to make life better for so many people. Arlene, Nisi, thank you so much. We love you guys, and Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays.